Hey, Emil, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, hey Brian. Hey, so my name is Emil. Kind of professionally, currently, I'm leading a team of six AEs at a company called Inverse. We're focused mostly on the SMB segment of the market. It's been super exciting. For the past decade, I've held various positions from SDR to account executive to some operational and enablement roles. Personally, I currently live with my girlfriend here in Montrose, Colorado. She has a 3-year-old daughter, and we also have two dogs, black lab named Bruiser, and a little 10-pound mini dachshund named Miso.
Wow.
But don't let her size fool you. She harasses our our black lab pretty well. So
Cool. Yeah, I was looking through your background and it's pretty diverse. Um,
yeah.
well, what was the motivation to do all the switching, like especially like the ops piece, because the ops tend to stay in that area.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think for me, what I really enjoy, and even in the sales world, I think tinkering with how things work and like why they work or why they don't work in some cases, right? Why isn't something working? And so that really drew me to those positions. And I think early on in my career, actually being an SDR and then taking on some of those ops and enablement roles, honestly, I probably learned the most about businesses, how they work, what people are expecting, especially kind of at the, like, let's say VP or senior executive level. And so to me, that's something that's pretty interesting, and I kind of consider myself a more analytical person even today. And so while I kind of feel like it's almost like keep getting kind of sucked back into more direct sales or like leadership roles. But that's kind of why I explore those paths in the past, and I think it's actually helped build a good foundation for what I'm doing today as well.
And which one of those jobs was the hardest?
Out of like the ops and enablement, I would
Even the SDR and the AE and now a manager, you've got a very broad perspective.
yeah, I think they all come with their own challenges. For me, I would say the hardest was probably the sales enablement side of things,
Yeah.
because even to this day, as like a manager, right, I feel like I'm pretty hands-on in the day-to-day. It's very hard to kind of sit back and just be like, let things happen. Obviously, each rep has their own autonomy, and I'm not like a micromanager, but I like to kind of be in the fray, if you will. And so I think in those roles, sometimes it's tough because you're hoping, right, that these changes will kind of drive better results and people will improve and their careers will get better and all that. And sometimes it doesn't, and you're not that direct kind of either frontline or even director, VP level manager. And so I think sometimes that's kind of tough, or that was probably the toughest for me because it wasn't as necessarily hands-on as I typically like to kind of do things.
And what excites you? What drives you? What's your motives?
Yeah, great question. So I would say for me, a big thing I think is my family. In my direct family, I'm kind of one of the first folks to go to and graduate from college. So I think for me, it's important to make them proud and kind of have a good career trajectory, right? And then I would say the other things, I love this question because I feel like they always change. As I've been trying to get better at like zooming out on things, like whatever it might be. And it's kind of funny as you look back, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, how your kind of goals and trajectory have changed. So I'd say the other big driver for me right now is with my girlfriend, eventually we want to get married, buy a house, kind of build a family. So those are some other big motivating factors for sure.
Yeah. But how about getting into leadership? Because that's a big change.
Yeah. Yeah. So, for me, I think even from a young age, I've always kind of been someone that, likes to kind of be at the forefront and kind of be the driving change, right? And kind of making things happen. And so I kind of view leadership as like someone that's, willing to kind of, I think, step up, do the things that are necessary, and kind of be the person that's like almost I always kind of liken it to in basketball, like being able to dive around for ground balls and kind of loose balls and kind of do all those different things, make sure your team has what they need to be successful. And so for me, I think it's always kind of been somewhat of a natural trajectory, but of course it comes with, not downsides per se, but you're dealing with a lot of different personalities. You have your own personality, right? So it's definitely interesting, day to day. And like I said, I like to kind of be in the mix and kind of operating and doing the things. So even today, I'm still, running demos with my team, hopping on discovery calls, pricing calls, closing calls, whatever it might be. And so, yes, I guess I have like a leadership title, but I feel like I still consider myself almost like a individual contributor in some ways, right? And kind of
Was there any surprise when you got into leadership? Something that you wish you knew about, or found out it was a little bit different than you anticipated?
Yeah. So I would say for me, the biggest, I think, thing is not only do you now have accountability upwards, right, but you also have accountability downwards. And so sometimes, I was thinking about this actually earlier this morning because I saw a bunch of posts on LinkedIn about this, and I get it, right? Sometimes I think it's easy to kind of like beat up on the sales manager, right? Like, why is my sales manager asking me for this? Why? And so I just go to my team and say, look, at the end of the day, I get it, right? We all have kind of bosses, they're asking us for stuff. And so would I personally do something this way or look at it this way? No, but can we just kind of get this done and make sure the people, above us kind of have what they need? And so I think that's been one thing that, it's a little bit different because now you're kind of in the position where you are now being asked to go and ask people to do something, right? And so I don't think delegation is that natural of a instinct for most people. And so that's probably what I've struggled with and have been working on the most recently to kind of, get things done, because I'm so used to like, oh, you're asking me to do something, let me just get in there and kind of get it done. But sometimes you do got to kind of pass the ball off and kind of trust your teammates to do what's necessary.
And how was it because you moved up within the same company, right? So you were AE, then you moved into sales leadership.
Yep.
How was that as far as the other people's perception of you? And was it your first time as a leader?
It was my first time as a leader, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a good question. So I think what I've learned in taking any leadership role, especially in that first one, is you kind of have two paths to take, right? You can kind of take this path that's like, okay, now I'm the leader, I probably have different things to do, I'm just going to kind of focus on those things, which makes sense. And I think that's I've done that. And I think that's kind of the wrong path to go. And I think the better path is you're still in fact, I think you probably become somewhat less of an equal now to the team, meaning you're there to serve the team, right? They're not there to serve you. And so you really got to kind of, I think, flip that mindset. And I think when you don't kind of stay in the trenches, do some of the work, be there as a person they can count on, that's where things get messy, right? And I think folks lose faith, just like anyone, right, would, right? Like if, my boss was doing the same thing, I'd be like, I don't know if I can really trust this person, right? And so, I think that first 90 days, it's really critical to make sure you're still kind of there with the team, doing those things and kind of leading the charge, right? So
now, how did you not fall into like the ops trap of being a leader, where you're watching the dashboard, trying to come up with the equations that will increase revenue and the...
Yeah. So I think for me, it's just ingrained in my person. It's very tough. Even today, I'm not necessarily a dashboard manager, right? I think numbers are important and they have their place, and analytics are very important, but there's also kind of this feel to sales, right? Of like kind of what's going on, the momentum, some of those more intangible, I guess you could call the science part of sales, or sorry, the art part of sales. And so for me, I think eventually as I was going through that, I was like, okay, same thing with the enablement side. I was like, this is just too, I think, hands off and kind of in the background for what I want to do. And so as I kind of continued further exploring that, I was like, all right, I think it's just time to get back into sales and kind of let's go for it, right? I was actually thinking about this morning too. It's interesting because I think when you start your career, a lot of times people recommend be a generalist, right? Like learn as much as possible and kind of figure out where you want to be. But then I think there is a point in your career where you have to get specialized, or you're going to kind of get stuck, I think, in that like generalist type role, which I think at some point will probably stunt your career growth, unless that's like kind of what you want to do and you're okay with that, right? But I think for me, I was like, okay, I want to keep climbing here, and I think more direct sales role would be the best path. So,
Well, that's it. A lot of people just try and stay generalists and don't go deep enough.
right. Right.
And what do you think reps should go really deep on?
Yeah. So I think to be a good, or I guess a successful rep, you should, I think, do a few things, right? I think where you can go deep is two areas of the company you're in. I think one, really understand your buyer. I think one of the things I see, especially as reps are ramping or kind of getting into their new role, right, is they don't know enough. And so about the person or what that person's role is. So when you get on the call, it puts you on the defensive in a bit because the person you're talking to has so much more knowledge. So I would recommend really deeply understanding that buyer and what they typically struggle with. The second thing I would recommend is continue being a lifelong learner, right? Like I would say even today in sales, something that worked last week and you see people saying, oh, I had a 5,000% increase right on LinkedIn. The next week there's a post that's like, this outreach sucks and I hate this and like never ever, right? So I think kind of stay in tune with what's going on and kind of, it's one of those things that I really do think you have to show up and kind of hone your craft each day, right? And see what's working, iterate, improve. And so I think if you do those two things pretty well, you should generally, I think, come out on the other side like a pretty well-rounded and successful rep. So that would be my thing.
Well, that's one of the most powerful things somebody in your role as a leader or coach can do is play the customer.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I've been encouraging our team internally. So we sell to other finance professionals, right? CFOs, controllers, stuff like that. And so I've kind of been challenging my team. Well, we have all these folks on our team, right? We have a pretty big, I think we have like 20 or 25 finance people. When you get a question that you don't understand, the first thing I do is I typically reach out to someone on our team and say, hey, a CFO brought this up. We haven't really heard this before. Is that the thought of where, finance leaders are going? Leverage those internal resources if you have them, right? Don't kind of sit on the sidelines, like get those answers and then start to interject that into new conversations, right? Hey, I've spoken to 10 CEOs or CFOs over the past week. They mentioned X, Y, and Z. Is that similar to what you're experiencing today, or are we kind of off the mark there, right? And I think that'll start to give you the power and respect in those conversations. Like, oh, this person's an equal to me. They know what I'm struggling with or what I'm thinking about, right?
Right. Instead of focusing on what the product does.
100%, yeah, because no one cares, right? At the end of the day.
No one cares, not until they do.
But like nobody cares, right? They're like, okay, cool. What does that do for me at the end of the day, right?
Well, that's it. Because most people would say, well, study finance books and go get an MBA. And it's like, well, I don't think you need to go that far.
Right. I don't know if I'd recommend that, but I think get the real world education, right? What are folks actually thinking of? And something that I'm going to start working with my team on, it was a good idea we got from our product marketing side of things, is start tracking those, because everyone tracks closed lost, right? Like, oh, we lost because the product stinks or whatever, right? Start tracking some of those closed won and start looking at those trends, right? What are people really kind of moving forward with, and try to understand like what unique problem is that solving, and let that drive kind of the message, right? And so we haven't done as much of that, and I'm excited to implement it. And I was like, wow, that's actually like a really like basic, I guess you could say, but really powerful idea. So yeah, for sure.
Well, it's kind of thinking like a detective instead of like a census taker, trying to talk to every CFO and see what sticks, as opposed to talking to the CFOs that most likely have the problem that we solve.
Right. And I think the other big thing that's important to remember when you do this stuff is, because I think sometimes people will be like, oh man, well, it's like every CFO or controller or CEO or whoever your target audience is, they may not be experiencing that, right? Sometimes people are through. And so, it's like anything else. Some of it might land and some of it you're probably going to hear like, no, I don't really care about that, right? So, keep that in mind as well. There's no like silver bullet, right, to kind of move things forward. So,
and how do you control yourself from like hijacking the sales call or the demo when you know what to say, but if you do, you step on toes? How do you kind of balance the coaching and managing side of it?
Yeah. So for me, I think the more powerful lessons happen as mistakes are made. I kind of generally learn better even to this day when I make mistakes. I'm like, okay, that, wasn't the the best thing to do necessarily. And so for me, I let the team, I think, not struggle, but I think having that maybe mistake or failure happen and then catching up on it right after and kind of working through what that looks like is a much better and more powerful way to learn. And something I always tell my team is it's not, we're looking for progress, not perfection, right? At the end of the day, because no one's going to be perfect and we're humans. You're talking to someone and it may be a perfectly fair question, but they may get agitated about it or they may get upset or who knows, maybe, maybe they didn't sleep the night before, whatever, right? We're all kind of human. And so don't beat yourself up, but let's take that moment, let's learn from it, and let's try to get better, as we kind of go through those calls. So I'm actually a big proponent of let those mistakes happen and let's kind of learn from them for sure.
And I got to imagine CFO is a pretty tough persona to sell to.
They can be, they can be for sure.
Kind of dry.
Yeah,
skeptical.
yeah. I think in the finance world, it is much more cut and dry than you may see like in the sales or marketing world. The other thing that is tough selling into this segment is most finance folks, especially mid to senior level finance leaders, they're going to be just generally speaking better negotiators than you, right? They're kind of the bottom line folks. So it's very easy in these convos to get kind of beat up on that side of things. And so that's what I was mentioning before. I think it's really important to go into those conversations feeling as an equal and kind of an expert what they're struggling with, because they can be, very, very tough. And I think sometimes kind of intimidating, right? They're the keeper of the budgets and the keys. And so, but with that, I think it's also fun. And we're in a very unique position where these tools can be significant drivers of the business, right? And so I think for us, what we try to do is, okay, totally get it. There's going to be an investment at the end of this, right? But let's think about what that investment can do, right? What is that going to solve? Because if it's not going to solve or generate revenue, then,
they're not going to do it.
Either they're not going to do it or you're going to beat us up so bad that I'm going to be embarrassed.
You don't want it.
yeah, we can't, nothing's going to happen here, right? And so I always say that to my team, right? I think a good line is, look, I get it. You probably want to win somewhere on price or you want to feel like you've, gotten a win, which totally get it. But we got to be somewhat reasonable, right? If I go ask for 85% off, I'm going to get laughed out of the room, right? So, yeah.
And how do you build up the AEs to have that confidence to speak as a peer instead of taking the service mentality?
Totally.
Whatever you say, sir. And want a proposal, I'll give you 3, right? It's just
right.
what you're told instead of what you should.
Yeah. So I think for me, this is something I learned early on in my career is, look, it's easy. If we got on the phone right now and you're like, yep, I'm ready to move forward. I've done all my research. Just send me the proposal. Could I do that? Totally. What I've learned through sales is now if I don't vet the situation, sure, do I get a quick, easy sale? Awesome. But I haven't vetted the situation. And so the problems that can cause personally to me later down the line, right, with potentially a bad product, bad fit, pain in the butt for, implementation and customer success, it's just not worth it. And so I usually coach to the team of, that's fine. Look, they may move forward regardless, but let's vet it out. Let's make sure they're in the best position to make this decision, because they may see something online and think this is what it does or this is how it works, but we don't really know that. And we also don't really know what they're uniquely trying to solve for. And so I think when you go into it with that mentality, it's like, well, I think you're just expecting to take an order, and that may not always be the best solution for any involved, right? You don't want to have someone now think about it as almost like your personal brand is on the line, right? You're just letting this person kind of float through. Let's figure it out, because at the end of the day, it may not be a fit for you, right? It just might not, and that's okay too.
Think how many times you've been on Amazon and something looks like what you want, and then it arrives 2 days later, and you're looking at it and you go, this isn't really what I wanted.
Right. Not the right color or look different. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
It was cheaper, but I'm not sure it does what I want.
Right. And so I think you definitely have to have that mentality going into it, or at some point it's like, why are we taking the call? Right. If we're here for a reason. And if the person on the other end of the line is not open to the conversation, then maybe it's just not the best fit for their business, not the best fit for our business, right? Our time, I always say, like, our time is just as valuable, right? As the other person we're speaking to, because hopefully we're trying to come together to have a mutually beneficial conversation and outcome, right? And that outcome might be, look, we're just not the right partner, right, at this time or at this, and that's okay.
Right.
You know?
Because if it doesn't do what they think it should, whose fault is it?
It's going to be our fault ultimately. Right?
Yes, it is.
Exactly.
And then the other side of it is we think because they want a proposal that they're ready to buy. They might
Right.
just be ready for a proposal.
Right. Yeah. Maybe they just want to see what's going on. And why do they want to see that? Right. Like, what's
Right. They think they know what it does. And I think it also builds trust, because if you say, well, I want to make sure you're getting what you really want and need. Can we go through what you want and need,
right.
so I don't quote you the wrong thing?
Exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if it's not the right thing, I can help you find what the right thing would be.
Right. Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Because, like, think about it too, and just in your person, same thing with the Amazon example. I mean, how many times do you go on a website or into a retail store? You don't always buy something, right?
Right.
That would be crazy. You'd probably be pretty broke pretty quickly, right? And so, I think having that conversation, you're right, does kind of set you up and put us in a position where now we're equals. Now we're both on the same page. Hopefully, we're both on the same side of the table, and kind of get you, where you need to be. And also, I think for our team's perspective, one thing I like to coach to is, don't get caught. This person, like you said, they might be asking for a proposal. And now what are you going to do? Call and email them every 2 or 3 days? Like, now we could just be wasting time. Like, what is the purpose of why we're doing what we're doing? Right.
Right. Because sending a proposal doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's usually the worst thing you can possibly do, because now they think they have everything they need.
Right.
And they're not going to call until they either need an updated proposal, or something changes. And the last thing you want them to feel is they've got everything they need when they don't.
Right. Right. Or a quick question could be, hey, I usually coach my team, is this an exercise? Like, do you have other stuff lined up? And this is just an exercise to see if there's better pricing out there in the world? Like, what are we looking for? Because that's the case, I can tell you what the pricing might be, right? You're looking at a $10,000 investment for a year or something, right? And that's fine. If that's what you need, I'm happy to give you that info. But I don't want to spend too much time here if there's no real, mutual interest, right?
And of all your skills, which one do you think is the most valuable in selling?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I notice, and I'm guilty of this even to this day, and I did this when I was a younger rep, but younger reps do, is we're so excited to talk about our features, pitch our product, demo stuff, go through things, that we aren't listening on calls. And so we're taking what someone says at, like, straight up value, and we're not kind of using that to dig deeper. And so something I always kind of go through with myself and even my team is, let's take a deep breath and let's really understand what they mean by that. The second part of that, I think, is it's very easy to get frazzled in these moments, right? Where a question pops up that you weren't ready for, or you haven't spoken about. And now we get into same thing, feature sets, demo, pitching. And so I think it's just take a deep breath. It's just a conversation at the end of the day, and try to understand where they're coming from, right? Like, is this a critical other problem we haven't uncovered? Or is it just, oh, I saw something on the screen. What does that mean, right? Like, let's kind of try to get to that point first before we go off and talk or show anything else. So that would be, I think, the biggest skill that I would point to, because I think the other thing is, in a conversation, it helps the other person feel heard
right? And understood.
Good. Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Because they don't feel understood when you feed back speeds and feeds.
Right.
They're more confused. And how do you do that? Do you just dig, or do you pause and see if they'll continue the question?
Yeah. So for me, and I know some people may not like this approach, but I'll usually take a pause and ask, hey, can you tell me a little more about, like, what's happening there, how you do that today, just so I can understand where we're at. And also, where are you hoping get to, right? Like,
It
what does
is.
that look like? Or what are you struggling with today? Because if I don't know that and I just show you some random button on our product, you're going to be like, all right, cool. Like, how does that help me, right? Or what am I actually getting or benefiting, or what's improving in my life from
Trying
this?
to
And
learn their workflow.
yeah, learn their workflow and try to also understand, because you may be glossing over something that could
Yeah.
be a critical problem that they may have forgotten about, right? Or it just didn't come up. So I think keeping that open mindset, that active listening, really helps as you kind of move through the process.
And what do you look for in reps when you're hiring?
Yeah. So typically, I know there's probably a laundry list that people look for in terms of like a checklist of stuff. And so I don't know if I'm a checklist guy, but what I like to try to understand is, what's their why and their motivation, right? What are they kind of playing for? Because if you can't clearly state that, I think it's going to be really tough for you to have the discipline to make it in sales. It's a tough. I always say to people, so I do this mentorship, and I always say to folks, look, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to get beat up and roughed up a little bit. You got to have that determination to keep moving forward. So I really like to understand from folks, like, what is that, right? What are they kind of playing for at the end of the day? What's their work ethic look like, right? Because I think in sales, it's one of those things that you have to kind of show up each day and be ready to do the same things, right? And because I think some folks think sales is exciting, I'm having conversations of doing this, but
Steak dinners and golf.
yeah, it's like kind of monotonous in some levels, right? And you're like, not as exciting as you may think. And so I think those are two of the bigger, qualities I look for when hiring, new folks onto the team. The third thing is, so I think a lot of times people will hire for like culture fit, which I think is important, right? You don't want someone that's kind of like a lone wolf or, something like that necessarily. But what I like to look for is, can they be a culture add to the team, right? Do they have some strength, being more analytical, being more thoughtful, maybe more experience that they can add to the team that everyone will collectively get better from, right? And so I think that's also kind of important. And I actually think most people leave that out. And what you end up with is kind of a team that may be really good in a lot of areas, but they're all going to be good in that areas, and really maybe sucky or bad in some areas, and they're all going to be really kind of sucky or bad in those areas. And I don't think that's what you want at the end of the day. So,
And have you ever found a why that didn't make sense? 'Cause the typical ones, family, lifestyle,
totally.
they like working with people. They like the variety that sales brings.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say those are the typical ones. I don't know if I've ever found one that doesn't make sense, but I've heard one that was very interesting. And this individual brought up that they were looking to get into sales. And of course, part of it was like lifestyle stuff, but they like the fact that there was a little bit of exclusivity to it, almost, where if you become a good seller, you kind of join this like exclusive club in some ways at your company. And so I thought that was an interesting kind of answer. And by getting good at sales, you might be able to gain access to other parts of business or the world that you may not have had before. And so maybe that's a bad one, maybe it's a good one, but it was probably one of the more interesting reasons that I've heard for someone's why, for sure.
How about when you're interviewing, what red flags are you looking for?
Yeah, so this is a good one. Two red flags. One, if you're going to come to an interview, be prepared to speak to numbers and things that you put on your resume. And here's the thing, I get it. Sometimes people are going to fake stuff or exaggerate stuff. Make sure those numbers are correct and the story matches up. I can't tell you how many times I'm like, okay, well, you're 150% to goal. So let's talk through your metrics, and the numbers they throw out after that. It's like, well, this doesn't make mathematical sense here. Something's a little broken along the lines. Don't get caught in that trap. I think that's a pretty big red flag. The other thing is, don't underestimate the power of who you're interviewing with, potentially their network. It's very easy, I think, in today's world of LinkedIn and social media and Twitter and all this stuff, for someone to maybe know someone in your network. So I would say, make sure when you're coming, you're presenting your true self and able to kind of talk through those things. And don't get caught in that trap of trying to kind of over exaggerate, what you've been doing. For
Yeah.
sure.
And don't burn those bridges that
Well,
might be.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because you never know. Someone might just reach out and say, there's been plenty of times I would have never expected this, probably in the past 2 or 3 years. People from 4 jobs ago that I haven't talked to in a decade, they're like, hey, we're going to hire or we're thinking of hiring so and so. I see you were connected and worked with this company. Can you give me some more information on this or that? Right. So it does happen. I would have never thought it happened because no one's really ever asked me. But once I started getting asked, I was like, okay, I can see where that becomes very important.
Yeah, because the kind of backdoor or unofficial reference is so much more powerful than them giving their best friends as their
Totally.
reference.
Totally. Right. Yeah. No one's ever going to give someone that like doesn't like them.
That
Right.
hates them.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to have a reference like that typically. So
Cool. Hey, I really appreciate your time today. Where can people go to connect and follow you? And if you're looking for anybody, feel free to pitch it.
yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Just Emil Gondos is my name there. I'm usually pretty active, so would love to connect and kind of add each other to network if it makes sense. So yeah, thanks for having me on. This was awesome. I'm glad we were able to chat through this for sure.